If you've been watching this channel for any significant length of time, then you're aware of the fact that I am really not a big fan of jargon. Now, unfortunately, there's certain situations where jargon is totally appropriate, and those situations are typically when you need to be hyper specific about what you mean. Oftentimes, what I find is the case that a lot of people like to use big words because they haven't figured out a simpler way of expressing what they're saying. But there is a couple situations in programming where I do think it is really important to nail your definitions down really well. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about two important definitions to understand for anyone working in an object-oriented system. Number one being an abstraction, the concept of having an abstraction or something is an abstraction, and number two is the concept of implementation. So we'll be getting into all that and more in this video. To begin with, I want to talk about what I think about the word abstraction outside of the context of programming. So in order to kind of explain what I mean here, we're going to get a little bit philosophical, and I'm going to give you a definition of an abstraction, which is as follows. An abstraction is a less detailed representation of an object. So in order to explain exactly what I mean here, I'd like you to imagine a silly little scenario where we are both cave people with limited communication abilities, and I've just come back from, say, the forest, and I found out that a particular type of snake, which happens to have a particular pattern and color, is particularly poisonous, and I am trying to communicate that idea to you. Now, since our communication is limited to a series of grunts and pointing gestures, then I decide, okay, well, I guess what I have to do is I just have to draw a picture of the snake on a rock. So, the snake that I drew is an abstraction. It's a less detailed representation of the object, which is detailed enough that I don't need to endanger anyone by showing them the real thing, but everyone's still happy because there's enough information in this photo for all of the tribe's members or whatever to figure out that this particular type of snake is poisonous, even though I haven't actually shown them a real snake. Now, going by the previous analogy, every snake in the world, which looks like my abstraction, is technically an implementation of that snake. However, as developers, we build things, and people don't typically build snakes. Snakes build snakes. So let's look at the definition of implementation from a different analogy. Suppose that we're building a house based on a blueprint, which would be the abstraction in this case. You might say that the building materials, such as the boards, nails, screws, roofing, and concrete, assembled are the implementation of the blueprint. It has more detail. It's in reality. An important point to note here is that implementations can be different and still satisfy the abstraction sufficiently. For example, if we implement this house with nails only and no screws, then it's going to be incredibly difficult to fix our mistakes or add anything to the house later on. It turns out that this exact principle plays out when we're building software as well, which is why I'm quite fond of these building type analogies here. To return to object-oriented programming, the abstractions which people will typically be referring to take the form of either interfaces, abstract classes, or protocols, or maybe some other word depending on which platform you come from. They all contain details and information which must be explicitly represented in any object which implements the abstraction. To give you a quick code example, in the following project, you will find interface classes which are prefixed with the letter I, and then implementations of those interfaces which are suffixed with the letters IMPL, which is short for implementation. This allows me to know exactly which parts of my application are abstractions versus the parts which have to carry out operations and basically have the actual code necessary to fulfill the given abstraction's description. So all of that is just a big way of saying, okay, abstraction, think interface, think abstract class, think protocol. Implementation is the actual code necessary to do the thing. So if you're still kind of fuzzy on what implementation means, understand it really means like the raw instructions necessary to do or create something. We're talking about code very specifically versus abstractions, which can, in some sense, even take the form of just a vague description of an object. So that's kind of the most important thing here. Abstractions are essentially, there's a lot of different ways you could abstract something, some object, and there's a lot of different ways that you can have your object fulfill the requirements of the abstraction. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So if you'd like to learn more about abstract classes, interfaces, and protocols in admittedly a Java context, then do consider checking out my interfaces video, link in the description box down below. In that video, I explain in sort of a long format the actual practical usage of abstractions in your code. They're super important, so I really can't stress this enough. If you still don't feel like you're really clear on what an abstraction is versus implementation, and you don't really understand exactly why interfaces are useful, please do check out that video or continue to research it, because this is absolutely key to becoming a really good developer. Thank you so much for watching. If you have questions about Android, Kotlin, software architecture, or just programming in general, then leave me a question down below and I might just get back to you in the next video. If you enjoyed this content, do me a favor and hit the like button down below. Consider subscribing, following me on your preferred social media platforms, and even throwing me a couple bucks on PayPal or Patreon. Links in the description box below. Thanks for watching and peace out.